Hello and welcome to another episode of the Tech Marketing Podcast. I'm joined by another podcast veteran, Therese Parkes, no stranger to us. You joined us actually at the A&As back in, goodness, what year are we in now? 2023, was it, that you were speaking there?
Yeah.
And what were you speaking about? So firstly, welcome back. It's a pleasure
you.
to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Can you remember what you were talking about back then and tell us kind of what your role is now?
Yep, I was talking about the changing B2B buyer journey. I'm almost certain because I talked about it a lot. And so, and what I'm doing now is actually working at an enterprise software that's been acquired by a much larger consulting company.
And how has, I'm always excited to get you back on. Like we kept in contact since that wonderful podcast back in the summer of 2023. So really excited to get you back on today. But shifting from somewhere like Google into one of the big consultancies, like what's something you've learned from that move? Like what's changed? What's been is your passion still there for the buyer journey, or have you seen it kind of evolve?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, at Google, I was certainly in an advisory role, and I was my goal was to make each and every one of my customers as successful as possible, and we did that through the lens of research and understanding how the market had changed and how the buyer had changed, but also how each of them, what was prevailingly going on with each of those clients, and advising them and sitting with them and having conversations. Well, now my hands are a little bit more on the wheel. I get to see how the intersection of how teams interact and how decisions play out and how internal friction can slow things down, or held beliefs, or that 30-year-old playbook that I talk about a lot can sometimes come into play. And it's no fault of anyone's own. It's just, it's really, these are the things that have always worked. And these are the things that get perpetuated. And so it's really interesting to see the intersection of going from an advisement role to sort of being more in the weeds and seeing how strategy and execution and culture all come together, and how that really all needs to go well in order to make things happen.
And having this year, I've always said, right, since when was it? Beginning of 2023, this started. Mm-hmm. So just when we met before as well, back in Florida, that my job was really easy as CTO until AI came out. And now it's been so transformational. It's been very clear, like which businesses can get strategy and execution and culture and that mix right to move fast, and which businesses can struggle. And probably going from being outside, similar to myself as being outside in an agency, to being inside, which is also the role we're playing, transforming ourselves. Like it's super interesting how frustrating that can sometimes be, actually. Like you know where you want to get to as the answer, but you've got to bring everyone along on that journey, haven't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're at this really interesting intersection where we know, right? We're all aware that AI was sort of the bingo card word of the last couple of years, and and then it's Gen AI or agentic AI, or now it's all different, like in what sort of use case we're using AI. And so everyone wants to rush to create this and to use it. But, do we have the right talent that's skilled up to do so? Are we recognizing how we're leveraging that, and is it in its best use case? And in many cases, we have sort of old measurement systems, old KPIs, old legacy sort of ways of thinking about our business. And yet we're very quickly trying to inject the latest technology. And so there's a delta between really getting the best out of it and making sure that it's informed in the best places, leveraged in the best places, and not just the shiny new toy. Right.
Like, how do you even start about trying to get that balance? Like, just thinking about this from we're a marketing agency. You're working, a big consultancy, and previously worked at a big AI company or company that's pushing AI. Like, how do you even start to understand that balance?
Well, first, I think you have to understand, what are you really trying to solve for? Like, what are you, like, step back, look from the macro, like, what are you really trying to solve for? Because I think a lot of times we say, oh, we're not profitable, or we're not efficient, or we're not, AI can help us cut costs or can move faster. Or, a lot of times when we looked marketing, Gen AI, it's like, oh, we did a study back at Google. It was like, oh, we saw that lots of people were starting to use Gen AI in their marketing, but those that were the highest growth, the most profitable, weren't those that had gone full sail into actually giving over all of their marketing capabilities into Gen AI. It was those that were testing into it and understanding it. Those that actually had given it all over were actually not in what we would call the highest growth, and we tried to unpack that and understand a little bit more. And that's probably because they were trying to understand its best use case. They hadn't just, dumped it in and let it ride. And I think that's the thing about AI or technology in general. It's, do you have the right people? Are you solving the right problem statement? Are they skilled up in the right way to use it? And then what does adoption look like? And is it endemic to the way that you're doing business? Is it actually solving? Is it easy to use, right? Have you actually made lives easier, made workflows easier? Is it injected into the workflow? Or is it now this very non-natural process, and we have to go left outside of the process and back in, just to say that we're using it? And I think, don't make it, everyone wants to have the claim of using AI or technology to solve in this era, but people are still at the core of this. And it's people who leverage these tools. And so at the heart of that, you need to have the right talent. They need to be skilled up in the right way. There's so much right now. I think AI was the word, and now it's all about building skills-based organizations or talent transformation, because as we look at how AI intersects, it really is changing the shape of every organization, who we need to hire, the way that organizations need to be shaped, the roles and responsibilities that everyone needs to have is actively changing shape. And it's a flywheel. It's like we all have to get to this foundational stage to catch up to where AI has intersected. But then it's going to keep moving very, very quickly. And so we all have to become much more agile.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing, I was speaking to one of our teams. Firstly, let's recognize a couple of the points you've referenced there, because I think they are vital. Even I've been on this journey for the last decade. I'm going to say I've been on this journey. I'm a technologist.
I love when you reference things and you're like, I have done this for a decade. No,
I know it sounds like I'm man and boy. I've been doing this, but the you've thrown me off now. No, it's good. It comes down to, like, as a technologist, I'd always go solution first. Like, I just get excited about the technology.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people do that with AI. They're like, okay, I'm going to buy Copilot, I'm going to buy Gemini, I'm going to add all this to our organization. And actually, the ones where I've seen the best use case, actually, let me phrase it a different way. The most success have been the ones that have been very defined about the use case.
That's right.
I've said, actually, here is a problem. Now let's bring AI to automate it. And on top of that, they focused on adoption, which comes into the talent and upskilling elements you've mentioned. So I think, like, those are the two key elements. And the technology is only really a third of it. Like, whether you're using ChatGPT or OpenAI or Gemini or Flash or
is it in the hands of those that need it? Is it actually widely being then leveraged for the thing that you said it was needed for? Because it's easy to go out and buy or bring in a bunch of quote unquote technology solutions in the effort of these solves. But the reality, if it's only being leveraged in a third of its capability, or in by only a third of the people, it is debt. It is waste. and the market is hard. So, operational efficiency or operating margin was the topic that I had with almost every single one of the CEOs when I was at Google. And so this is a core consideration, is that if you're going to bring in a technology to solve something, particularly for something like efficiency and profitability and making your business better, you surely have to make sure that it is actually being used.
It's one of the key problems that I've seen just thinking about the future of all of our businesses, right? And I really want to pick your brains on this. Like, how do you that adoption? There's no what I've found is there's no formula to getting adoption working. I'm sure
Right.
someone out there will say, no, of course there's a formula and there's a 10-step process and this is what you run. But
Yeah.
what I've learned is certainly in kind of medium-sized businesses, a lot of it is around energy and perseverance. Like
Yeah.
it is, you just got to keep drilling with people about how they could use it until they adopt it. Like 9 months ago, I was talking to one of our teams earlier today. We were having to remind them of the tools we gave them access to and how to use them, and we had to run constant training sessions. Now, you can't rip those tools away from them. Like it is so ingrained in their processes that we couldn't consider doing business any other way. Like, what is your strategy? Apart, I'm not going to say pure energy and perseverance is the best strategy here. Like, how would you break it down?
I think it's really funny that you're talking about an incredibly sort of manual process,
Yeah.
right, for something that is a technology solve. I find that wonderfully ironic. Anyway, what I think, when it comes to things like this, it's how are you baking it into workflows? How are you baking it into management conversations? How are you exposing it in terms of its adoption? Do you have dashboards of usage and adoption, and how deep? And obviously it depends on what the technology is. So I'm trying to sort of think from a very but chat GPT or Gemini or Copilot or whatever it is, it's how many people are actively engaged? What is the feedback daily? And are you gathering that feedback? Are you actioning that feedback? Then what is the impact to and from? I think really interestingly, a lot of times we get some form of technology, we implement it, and then we don't actually ask them how it's going, right? We just expect them to use it. But if we don't ask them, has it, it's about, so the sort of energy and perseverance, I agree. It's about injecting it into now the management, one-on-one conversations. How is that going for you? Does that make sense? It's about having town halls and education, of course, but it's more about how have you now made whatever its solve is or its impact, its intended impact, now into workflow such that it's exposed, such that you're monitoring it. You have to, it has to be witnessed. So yes, it's energy and perseverance in terms of education and like, let's go and whatnot, but you have to be able to sort of quantifiably understand how it's being used, and then qualitatively understand what's good, what's not, and then make changes and pivots. Because otherwise people aren't going to, it's just going to be the thing that hums in the background, and it'll be like nice to have, not need to have.
Yeah, it's and I think, by the way, this is a massive debate. I think a lot of the AI companies aren't giving any insight into some of those use cases quite yet. Like we've seen that as a challenge. Like it is, I'm surprised how little visibility they are providing into who's using it, when are using it.
Measurement and data are at the core of absolutely all things in business. I feel like, you know what I mean? Like when it's marketing, I talk about data. When it's AI tool usage, I talk about data. I think you need to frame understanding through objective things. And so these AI companies that, I have seen so many where it still feels a lot like vaporware, and it's like the output of whatever they've created might be through the lens of very sophisticated tools, but what they deliver to you is a very manual spreadsheet or a deck or whatnot. That's not scalable yet. And so it is challenging to make sure that it is being used in its highest and best form if you're waiting and if it's not real time, if you're not getting feedback. It's like we put the technology into the shiny thing, but not into the thing that actually helps us with the adoption, with the benefit, recognizing the benefit of it, right?
Look at it the other way. What, if you saw these businesses that had invested a lot and weren't in that top segment, you saw the ones that were investing in a more iterative fashion, focused on use cases and adoption in the high quadrant, let's say.
Yeah.
What were the businesses that were falling behind? What were they not doing? And I guess the answer might be easy. They were not adopting any of these new technologies. But was there any other insight into the ones that were falling behind?
Yeah, I think it's just it's hubris of like, I know better, right? Like, I think that we all just need to stay curious and understand, like, really understand, could there be a solve? I think that the businesses that I have found where they fall behind is really just a set it and forget it mentality. And I think, we investigated this 3 years ago. We know the answer. We're good. Or we tried that technology and 3 years ago, it didn't work for us. We're good. Well, the speed that innovation happens today, the speed that the market changes today, that competition changes today, I think it's just about not having enough agility and flexibility in your teams and in the way that you measure success, that you get stuck in sort of a river of thinking of like, we've got this and this is what got us here and we're going to stick on the path.
I've definitely seen that in certainly more technical roles. There's that kind of reluctance to I know better. I've seen this before, and the pace. We did an evaluation again a year ago with certain roles, and we were like, it's just not good enough. Fine. Now we just rerun that evaluation, and it's now the difference is so
wildly
stark.
Different.
It's scary. Like I've had, coming back to building high impact teams, I've had team members come to me and say, I'm so excited to be using this. I'm also incredibly anxious because what this could mean for my job. So it's kind of scary, but it's like, how do you try and manage? You talked about talent before. Like, how do you try and manage that dichotomy or divide?
Look, I think everyone wants to believe that AI is coming for all of us, or ML or the machines. The whole like this idea that we're all obsolete, but it is technology, AI in the hands of well-trained individuals, and so there are functions that are repeatable. When we look at and this is a throwback, but like there are mechanisms and understanding and measurement and data sort of paths within marketing or that are wildly beyond what a human can and should do. But that doesn't mean that the interpretation, that the then the net action as a result, like what to do next with that understanding, crunching, billions of signals is the work of machines. What to do then is the work of humans. And I think it really is about an assurance that these tools are built and best leveraged in the hands of well-trained and well-defined roles for humans. And it's not a replacement, it's an enhancement. And so how are we ourselves holding ourselves accountable to be able to relinquish the things of ourselves that are, that don't serve us to do the repeatable, heavy lifting of data crunching, or writing an email better through chat gpt, whatever it is. But what can we do instead? Are we keeping ourselves honest about the direction of, and keeping our skills sort of refined and up to date with how to leverage these tools? It's the machines plus humans that is the sweet spot. So
Yeah. Although I'm going to challenge that slightly. So I saw a stat earlier today. I'm sure you've seen the
oh
same stat.
no, now you're gonna give me an existential crisis. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this was your ex-colleague at LinkedIn posted this. So Peter, I think it was on Peter Weinberg's LinkedIn today.
Oh, okay.
Did you see this
No, I haven't yet.
where they talked about and I'll have to try and dig out where the stat is. Let me see if I can find it. But it's along the lines of talking about doctors, right? Doctors without AI, let's say, had to have like 78% response rate.
Sure.
AI on its own had something like 92% success rate, like in the 90s, so an
Sure.
increase. And then it was along the lines of doctors with AI, which is augmenting it. You'd think like, okay, that's going to be the best of both worlds, was lower than AI on their own. So there's been a study on this to say, hang on, like that does start. Don't get me wrong. Like I read that and was like, is that true?
Well, yeah. Again, I'd have to investigate what that quote unquote study is, and the use case for that, and what that means, and like the response rate. But I think, you know, chatbots or customer service, right? Like, yeah, I think it was my, I think it was a Klaviyo or something. They replaced, like, you know, an individual, like their chatbot, their customer service chatbot was able to do like 250 hours times what an individual human could, and with a sort of correct response hit of 85-90%, versus like individual where you get it right, you get it wrong. And it hovered maybe in that same, but the productivity leap was, exponential. But we still have to, like, we as humans will get, we as consumers have gotten used to a spectrum of sort of experiences that are different than before. Think back just 10 years ago or more, you would walk into a bank and transact and get money. No one really walks into a financial institution unless it's absolutely dire, or you have to get a official check. And you can even get those via mail, ordering them from the internet these days.
And by the way, we don't even use money anymore out here.
Well, that's it. Well, like, and I will say the UK was always more advanced. Like living there,
it's the one thing we're more advanced on. That's it. There's not much more.
But it's wild. You are like giving a sort code and an account number in 2009, and why do we have Venmo? Like it's anyway. I digress. But the point is that we get used to a number of experiences. People still, as humans, don't love or are very critical of customer service experiences that are typically only run by bots. And so a doctor experience, I don't know that we're there yet. So while it might be quote unquote technically better, or more accurate, we still crave human personal experiences. And I'm not sure that we're at the place where we're ready to just sit back and let the machines take over all human interaction.
Yeah. And this comes to like my other answer to, I'm using the example of doctors there as kind of one extreme, like coming back to sales and marketing and come back to maybe what's not changed with this technology evolution. I think if we I've got a very strong opinion on this, and I'll test it with you. Like, I don't think Gen AI has as much of a place in marketing as people think it has.
Marketing is still about emotion and evoking emotion,
exactly.
And about trust and connection. And one thing machines don't do well is sentiment. They don't do that sort of emotive understanding. They can make pretty pictures. They can, refine your text to make for flow for your email maybe slightly better, but they cannot replicate trust. They cannot replicate emotion. And that is where humans plus, whatever, you might be able to crank out 15 versions of copy, or with pictures and like ad variants, or hundreds and thousands, with Gen AI. But you need to get to the first place where it's created from a place of understanding and understanding the personas and understanding your customer, and from a place of trying to create connection. And connection isn't created by machines.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And actually, one of the biggest challenges I see is also this. It's got so many different names today, so you might have a better language than I will here. But like, essentially, if the machine's not going to get any new thoughts or new ideas from itself, so you're going to end up with this prolonged sea of sameness.
That's right.
I think it's called like model degradation, as the models train on
That's
themselves, right? So I think there's still a part to play to be like, there's got to be human in the loop somewhere that prods it, that pokes it in the right direction, and that gives it some original, creative, and critical thought. Otherwise, you're just gonna end up creating a complete sea of sameness.
Well, we always say trash in, trash out, or something of that nature, right? It is an insular. It's only as good as the data it's given. Yes, it can. It can extrapolate a bit or whatnot, but it's still with a data set, right? It's not going into infinite. It still is limited from, even if our human mind believes it's going into infinite places, because the kinds of extrapolations it can make. But to your point about model degradation, it is limited by the sort of frame it was given. And so, and think about how fast culture changes, or the lexicon, or, an event or whatnot. If that sort of freshness and awareness isn't invoked all the time, and also just sentiment, like there's a tone of culture in waves, right? You can talk to your friends and you're kind of all feeling the same way at a given time. If that's not invoked, then it becomes incredibly tone deaf.
I mean, what you just mentioned there about there's a whole other thing we can dive into about like building network effects, and actually how.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to go into this now because I want to pick your brain. It's something. And it's not, any of our talking points. We've not discussed this, but it's something that someone planted a seed with me the other day, and it's been going around my head since. So I'm just gonna let's dive into this. But before we do that, let's come into one of our biggest topics that we love talking about, which is the B2B buyer journey.
Yes.
How that's changed.
Yes.
Like, let's level set with everyone. Like, in your experience, what's changed? What's still changing? How do we need to be what's the paradigm we need to be thinking about when we think about B2B buyer journey today?
I think, look, again, we're in this moment of awareness. The buyer has changed. The expectation has changed. The seller has not, in so many cases. And that's because it's self-referential, right? Like the way that they measure success in these companies, the way they've done it for so many years. But I've heard so many times, like the buyer, the buyer journey takes longer. Like these leads it's time to close is so much longer. Well, why is that? Because those buyers it is a buyer's game. They are self-empowered and self-informed and doing all of their independent research. Literally gone is the day where they want to live in this narrow funnel that we give them. They will act and operate however they damn well please. And typically that is about, they will get all of the information they can that isn't gated. They will go to video and look at reviews. The video is huge these days, about watching someone talk or do a demo that they could be getting from the AE, but they don't want to talk to that AE. They want to watch somebody else that's sort of independent, or at least trusted in their perspective. They want to look at the white paper. They want to look at someone on YouTube or Reddit who's doing them side by side. Yes, I've used this and I've used that, and here's my take. Yep. People love the sort of collective opinion. And so they're using this as endemic to their buyer journey. And we also know that advertising is actually much more influential than we think it is, right? Like 67% added someone to their consideration set because of an ad. But typically this is like a video ad or a search ad. People are okay with the Internet of Things bringing someone into their sort of expansive information gathering, and then they go to a reductive state and they try and narrow it down. And by the time they come to sales, oftentimes they're really just trying to figure out a couple of things. Price, or that last little use case that they couldn't figure out because you gated something. But it's really, they're the most informed buyer set that we've ever had. And so if we don't respect that, and let marketing take them much, much further, right? How are we valuing the way that marketing should be on the hook for a lot? Because it can be.
So you've mentioned this term collective. What was the collective opinion, right? That's something that's been going through my head a lot recently. So completely agree, by the way, with everything you've said.
Is this tie back to the network thinking that we were just...
So, but I also think I'm going to add like another trend in here, and I'll give one of my other previous podcast guests was the one that got me onto this train of thinking, which is this concept that we are in a lack of buyer confidence as well, right? So that group has,
but it's bigger. Almost like this, because there is so much data. It's like that analysis paralysis. It's like, am I making the right decision? Oh my God, yeah.
So that group, exactly, that group's got bigger. Their data's got bigger, and so the core decision maker they've lost confidence in themselves. Right? They're no longer, because
everyone has an opinion and it's not the same opinion.
Exactly. Yeah. So I've got this. I'm coming up with this theory, and I don't know whether it's something new or whether I don't know. It could be something completely obvious, and you're going to tell me that now. But we in marketing, and sales, we always target the kind of the core of that group, right? I'm thinking about it like a big cloud of different personas and people.
When you say core, do you mean the CTO?
Yeah, the CTO, the CEO, the decision maker.
But I strongly disagree with this opinion. I don't think we should be... The CTO needs to look at the website or look at the brand. So this is where brand marketing comes in for the CTO. So every person in the buyer journey needs a different form of marketing and a different sort of feeling or outcome, or they have a different buying criteria. A CTO needs esteem. That brand needs to feel valuable and interesting, and needs to make sure that they aren't ruining their career, and they feel proud and they can puff their chest when they select said brand. Right? And so that they're not ruining their career, but all of the kicking the tires, the UI, the use, the price, like all of there is someone director level, maybe below, that is sweating and staying up at night, putting together a dossier to slide across the table to the CTO saying, this is the one that will make you okay. And that's the person you need to pay attention to. And we are not paying attention to that person.
So I completely agree, firstly, but also being a CTO that tends to make decisions. I don't know why I feel the...
I'm talking against you, but no, you just need to also agree. But your agreement is easier, I believe, in the sense of, is it known? Is it recognized?
Exactly.
Is it valuable?
So
check.
But exactly.
And then do you trust that person that's worked very, very hard? And so that's a conversation between you and the trust of that person, don't you think?
Yeah, completely agree, right? But I think I'm going to extend that in a couple of different ways. Firstly, I think everything you've mentioned there is the reason why we're losing consensus in the buyer group, because there's that feeling of, you hear my job's on the line, like the science here, and I'm just getting behind on the science on this because it's super fascinating. The more senior you get, the less likely you are to take a risk, because the more you've got at stake, and therefore the less likely you are to actually promote or talk about a brand, because you don't want to be seen to be promoting something.
1,000%.
Right. So
you want to plug and play. I can get into this in a total rat hole, but like, you want to focus on outcome and you want to protect yourself at all costs. So you're never going to hook your wagon, let's say, to any one thing, but you will discuss the outcome. You will discuss what it can do. Because if you come into a panic moment, you want the agility to unplug and replace something that can also do said thing, and you don't want sort of a co-marketing internally with any singularity, with with a risk entity. Like Therese cares about this software and this is the thing, or this solution, or this strategy, unless it's already proven.
Yes. So agree with that. So this is where so two things I'm still going to add on to what you said. Firstly, what you've described as that other buyer, I'm going to call them, I think they're still the target buyer, but I think there's a whole series of hidden buyers that we don't think about, right?
Because that's still a relatively senior person who is delegating parts of that.
Yep.
And the delegated entities are very, very important. That's why we say there's 17 to 20 people.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like, I keep saying security, compliance, legal, like all of these, all these departments that.
Yeah. If they don't get your green check.
Yep. Then they can come after
And
your
it
job.
doesn't move on. So it has to go through legal. It has to go through pricing. It has to go through compliance. It has to go through for end users. It has to go through, all these things. Yes.
So firstly, there's that. But secondly, and this is the bit that could be really obvious now you've said it, right? But if you think about that group, let's look at that hierarchy that you just described. So you've got the CTO at the top, and you've got this director level that's sweating the details. Around them will be a series of other roles. Like it could be technical developers, support engineers. A role of.
This is why a lead never matters, by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
This is why a lead is absolutely a nothing.
Exactly. And this is the point. Like I think, and this is where brand comes into it, our wonderful
discussion.
It
does.
Right?
You are
think that from a brand perspective, you need to target those edges. And from a DM perspective, you target the center. And that's the difference. Because I think if you go around the edges. I
wholeheartedly agree. Look, there's a role for all forms of marketing. And unfortunately in B2B, it has largely, in most cases, been overvalued in performance, in MQL, SQL, and hero in volume. But it's in brand and in consideration. And in consideration marketing, which is sort of that middle distance of do you show up when I go to continue to research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not performance, but it isn't quite, it's sort of in that middle, right? Consideration marketing, consideration as the form of marketing is the most important, and it sits squarely between. But if you're only paying attention, and that's why I talk about signals and not leads, right? You need to be paying attention to, have they been coming to your website a whole lot more, or have they looked at 3 layers deep into this sort of demo page, or are they going to, depending upon how much you can witness in the free and safe internet, are they looking at content that's adjacent to you in your community page or in Reddit or wherever, around the Internet of Things. So like, those are not necessarily direct, right? We don't think of them as like immediately correlative like behaviors, but those are the correlative behaviors now. Those are the things, I can't get that word out today. Those are the things that matter. And this is where ML comes in big, because we need to understand these patterns, and we wouldn't necessarily make these associations. We need to crunch big amounts of data at times to understand the persona and the journey and where this is happening. But this is where the magic is happening. And if you don't influence those touch points, you've missed the trick, because all of those key buying criteria are influenced well before we actually get to speak to them.
Actually, I want to extend your signals versus leads a little bit, because it's stuck in my head since our pre-call. The reason being, I think you said signals versus leads. We need to think about things as signals. I think bringing the brand to demand argument in, I think there's a signals question, and then there is a point at which it does become a lead, or it becomes, and how we define that lead is.
I mean, I think there's I am a little harsh, but I call lead acquiescence. But at some point, you've committed and you do want
Yeah,
to engage.
yeah. But I think there's this concept where we've got to understand that, before we were calling it engagement, I guess, which was, it's kind of still correct.
Right.
But I think there's this element of like, how do you start to define what brand means and the impact brand can have to then drive demand. Back to my original point, I think brand is outside in and demand is inside out of the
Right.
buyer group,
Yep.
depending on how you visualize it. And I think signals is your metric for how you measure the impact it's having and how far you're getting through that buyer group. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all easy to talk about this. How you actually bring this to life is still a question that I think many organizations are battling with.
But I think, look, brand acts as a demand amplifier, right? And so, like, we need to remember that you should be paying attention to short term performance metrics, pipeline influence, and, your CAC and sales velocity and leads and all of those things. But you also need to look at, if you want to measure these things, you look at your share of search, or your organic traffic, or downloading white papers, or there are things to measure, right? There is engagement, um, category preference, footprint, unaided brand recall. Like, there are things you just have to be able to value them,
Yep.
because I think there's also market impact, right? Competitive benchmarking. Brand will help you with your ability to price, right? If your brand equity is high, you have pricing power. So these are things to measure, right? But we don't have an iterative culture of this. We think of brand as waste, and we hyper value that lead, and we are myopically focused on a cost per lead. And if you don't have an integrated sort of sense of a marketing program, you're just missing the trick, because we hear time and time again, the sales team is, we have these leads, or we have this pipeline. How old is that pipeline? How many times have you turned that over? How much of it is real versus not real? Like, what's your time to close? What's your deal size? Is it going down? Is it going up? Like, we're not kicking the tires on that as much. And it's sort of trending downward, but we accept that. And yet we're not really shifting the marketing strategy.
But why? Okay, because I know we're coming to a close now. Why are we accepting that we're trending downwards on that? Like, what is, everything you've just mentioned there, things, metrics that businesses should be tracking? Like, why are they not?
Because they don't have room to value it in a way that is connected to revenue.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Fine. I would agree. But I think this is the big shift I've seen. So I had a chance to interview more of your colleagues, I would guess, fellow speakers at the ANAs this year, rather back in 2024, and that was the big shift that we saw, was this move towards using the same metrics as the rest of the business.
That's right.
We're now seeing CMOs with two big trends that I love here.
It's the rise of the growth officer versus the CMO, right?
Exactly. That's it. Like, that's the trend that we're seeing, is like people are now redefining themselves not as CMOs, but as like growth and disruption.
And growth is marketing plus revenue, or marketing plus, and that's the way it should be, because we spend all of our time online, essentially.
Agreed. So, final question. I'm going to try and do this question justice. So we talked a lot about B2B marketing and sales just then. How do you as a business, how would you start to integrate these buyer signals into your workflow, tech stack, people, whatever that's people, process, reporting back to the board? Like, what is the first stage to break that down? What's the piece of advice you would give other B2B marketers?
First, understand what you do measure, and what do you measure, and why do you consider that success, right? What has historically, and how is that trending? And so, like, take a state of play, and then understand what your tactics are, understand what your competitors do. And then I obviously care about things like brand marketing, and I care about So investigate what that could mean. Like, how can you, there are very smart marketers out there who make, you can use things like MMMs, or you can use things like schemas that bring in and make it sort of an end to end and tie it. But we know things like, as often quoted, for every dollar saved, it takes $1.85 to get it back. Like, that's about market footprint. That's about, like, have you ever cut brand before? Can you look back and see what happened, right? Because I think that we often cut brand, or we often cut, leads, or this form of marketing. And we look maybe very in a short time horizon, particularly with brand. We look in a short time horizon, we're like, no impact. But the funny part about brand is that it actually has a 6-year halo. And so if we're not paying attention to actually what happened, and we just don't make associations, right? We say, sales was less effective. We need to be willing to actually unpack and ask different questions. Did that actually happen? What during the down periods or the high periods, what was happening? And then what happened before, and, for the year or the 2 years? And can we create correlation? And so how do you set it up? Look, Neil Hoyne, who wrote a book at Google about, I think it's called Converted. And now I'm doing free press for him. But, when he says measure brand, and he talks so much about it, because it is the prevailing question that everyone asks. He's like, measuring it at all is better than not. Giving it a value at all is better than not. So my thought is, imagine or look at how it could be valued. Is it brand equity or unaided recall or what? And can that be tied to something that we believe is closer to revenue? And then measure it. Yeah. And then if that doesn't work, or it's not, be iterative, of course, but having a value for it and valuing it internally is better than just letting it go to the wayside.
I actually, strangely enough, I was having a conversation last week with someone in the channel space, and they were having exactly the same dilemma about how do they measure essentially the brand, the micro brand of their partner program with channel partners.
But it's like, is there more engagement?
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So value engagement. Is there more traffic to the website? No, I don't know what that necessarily means, but there's more. So if there's up and to the right or down and, or not, measure that, and then investigate what that could mean over time, and then make that measure tighter, right? But start, I think, is really, when it comes to how do you start, it's start.
Yeah. It's been a real pleasure to have you back on the Tech Marketing Podcast again today. Thank you for that wonderful debate as always. I'm looking forward to our next conversation. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Jon.